Welcome back to the shop, my friends. Steve here at SKS Props, and in today's build video, I'm picking up on a project that I had started last year, but I had run out of time, and that is creating a horse skull for Mari Lwyd. If you're not familiar with what that is, it is a Welsh Christmas tradition where crafters will take a horse skull and they'll embellish it by adding ears and ornaments, bells. It'll have a shroud to cover the wearer, and it'll have a mechanism that allows the jaws to open and close. And that's because the Mari Lwyd will then go door to door, and the occupants will come out and have a rhyming battle of wits with it. If you lose, you have to invite it in and give it food and drink. Now, this build is going to be broken up into two parts, and that's because it is kind of complex. There's a lot going on here, and I want to make sure that crafters have enough time between now and the holidays to get it done. So part one is all going to be about the fabrication of the base of the skull. Part two is going to be all about the details. So I'm going to be adding foam clay to make it look even more realistic. I'm going to paint it, and I'm going to do all the little bits and bobs, including the shroud, in the part two video. That way people can get a jump start on the base side of it and have it ready for the holidays. Now, this skull is made all out of my HD foam, which you can find over at Blick Art Materials. And if you like these build videos, you like the free templates, by all means, go through the links that are in the description section and those that are on my website. Every time you pick up HD foam, it supports me, it supports the channel, and you're getting amazing material to work with. Not to mention, again, the free templates. I know that's what you really like. So I want to show you what it takes to put this horse skull together. Let's go ahead and get started. To start this build, we're going to take parts A and B. These are going to make up the main nose section of the skull. These templates will be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Now notice on the template, to get the correct shape, that there will be angled cuts. Now because this is an organic skull, these cuts do not need to be perfect. You could always rough cut them with your hobby blade and then clean the angle up with your rotary tool. The point is just to get the angle close, so when these pieces are glued together, it gives it a unique shape. And any place that doesn't have a specified angle cut will just be a straight cut. I'm going to do a slight round over on all the edges with my rotary tool before a heat treatment. The heat allows me to not only seal the pores of the foam, but to manipulate the shape. This will help the foam better conform when gluing it together. Because the seams have a decent amount of strain on them, I am going to be using some weldwood contact cement. After the contact cement had been allowed to dry, I can then start to press the pieces together. For the two-part A pieces, I start at the top and I work my way down. After gluing these together, I can then assemble the part B pieces. This time I start at the bottom and I work my way up. Then I could glue the part A and B sections together. Now I'm not going to lie, this is a complex shape, but like I had mentioned earlier, if your seams aren't perfect, it is an organic skull. You could distress it further with a rotary tool or use some foam clay to build it up. But you can see how all of these pieces coming together gives it an extremely unique shape for the nose. For the sides of the skull, I'm going to be using part C, and this is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. The main two things to note is that there is a cut line that runs into the piece, and there is an angled cut along the top. This angle will help it match up to the nose section that's already assembled, while the cut section will be glued behind to create the correct shape. The stress on these seams is also going to be pretty high, so I'm going to be using some contact cement here as well. Now notice that part B does not get glued here. I found it easiest to match the notch in the nose to the notch on the side, and then work my way down towards the front of the skull. And you can see what I mean by referencing the video. The cut section can then be glued to the back side while the foam is curved. Doing this will give me the correct shape for the upper jaw. And at this point, the project looks like it could either be the beginnings of a horse skull or a spaceship. But keep following along and trust the process. The very front of the skull will be made up of part D. This will be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. And once again, I'm going to be using a little bit of heat to give the foam a slight round over before it's glued into place. This piece will be glued onto part C, where parts C and A start to deviate from each other. This piece does two things. It contours the front of the skull, and it stabilizes the front half of the project. To stabilize the back half, I'm going to be using part E. This is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam, and notice that there are slight angles on either side. And here you can see how it's going to tuck up into the skull. So the front to this piece is going to be glued behind part D, while the rest of the angled cut will be glued to the inside of part C. And here you can see how it just adheres above the cut section that I glued down earlier. This can then be repeated for the opposite side, and the interior of our skull is really starting to come together. The eye socket will be made out of part F, and this is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. Per the template, the end will have a 40-degree cut and it will attach to itself to make up the eye. But before I glue it down, I do taper and round over the front using my rotary tool. A little bit of super glue can then be added to the cut, and the foam can be pressed into place. The bottom of part F will follow the cut that I put into part C. This will help to define the cheek of the skull. Before I attach the top, I glue the two longer sections of part C together in the back. This will start to make up the support structure for the ears, poll, and shroud. To finish the eye, the outside edge of part B can then be glued to the back side of part F. And if you think this is complicated to put together, just think how I feel coming up with all of these different shapes and techniques out of my head. The backside of part F needs to be glued down, but to give the jaw mobility, I'm going to put down two spacer blocks made out of 10mm foam. These are going to come from part G. Then part F can be glued to the spacers on either side. Now the socket created from part F is smaller than necessary, and I did that on purpose so I could refine the shape better with my rotary tool once it had been installed. This will allow you to make the eye socket as big as you want if you plan on installing ornaments. To further build up this cheek section, part H is going to be cut out of some 6mm foam. This allows for the ocular cavity to have a little more material front facing. After these pieces have been glued down, I can then refine the shape and blend it into part F a little bit better using my rotary tool. And here's how half a clear Christmas bulb fits into the shape. To make sure that part F doesn't deform and I have the correct spacing for the jaw, I'm going to insert some small wedges of foam on either side. Now the jaw is fairly large, and you can see how it lines up with the upper portion of the skull. Part I is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam 2 times. To connect the two halves of the jaw together, part J will be in between. This piece will also be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. Starting in the front and working my way towards the back, you can see that I've glued this piece approximately in the middle of the jaw. Part K is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. This will make up a piece for stability at the back of the jaw, as well as the section that the rubber bands will attach to for the jaw movement. And here you can see how the jaw is fairly stable and has the ability to move. Now I'm going to work on the support structure for the back part of the skull. Part L will make up the first section, and this is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. This will attach to the underside of part B, as well as the backside of the loop of part C. In the video, you can see how part M is going to attach to the back of part F, as well as the underside of part B. These supports are going to be specifically for the ears, and will be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. The back part of the skull here does not need to be anatomically correct because most of this will be covered by the shroud, so it just needs to be rigid enough to help support the ears and the pole that'll be holding it up. The ears on either side are going to be made out of part N. These are going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. I do use a little bit of heat to get the ears to bend to the correct shape. And then while the foam is curved, I glue the base of it down to some 2mm foam. This will make sure that the ears retain the correct shape, as well as giving the ears a larger surface area to be attached to part M. Any excess 2mm foam can easily be trimmed away. With my ear shapes assembled, I can now glue these to part M on either side. As an additional layered detail for the outside of the jaw, I trim away part O from part I. This is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. These pieces can then be glued along the outside edge. I'm eventually going to fill this space with some foam clay to better match the overall look of a horse's skull. So on that same thread, part P is going to be traced and cut out of some 4mm foam. This will be attached on either side on the front of the jaw, where small teeth protrude back from the front ones. Moving back to the skull support again, part Q is going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. The inside cut of this piece may need to be altered just to make sure that it fits yours properly. This piece is going to be a spacer that will push the shroud out from the back of the skull. So I'm going to need a few more support pieces to help bulk this up. Part R is going to be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam. It will first be glued to the underside of Part B, and then attached to the back of Part Q. Any excess foam can then be trimmed away. The same procedure applies to Part S, which will be glued onto Part R as well as the sides of Part Q. A small support block consisting of Part T can then be glued to the middle of this intersection. To support the skull, I'm going to be using a 1-inch wooden dowel, and I need some pieces that it's going to fit into, which will consist of Part U and Part V, both cut out of 10mm foam. I should have probably attached Part V first, but I wasn't quite sure on the angle. But Part U will attach to the underside of Part E, as well as to the back side of Part L. Using the dowel to make an impression, I could then use my Forstner bit to cut a hole through the foam. I could then drill another hole through Part V. This piece is going to be attached up above on the underside of Part L. With all the support on the back of the skull complete, I can now start to work on the moving jaw. I start with a 1/4-inch bit and I'm drilling through the side of Part C. 1.5" Chicago screws are going to be used to attach the jaw, but it's going to give it enough room to move. So after I'm satisfied with the initial placement, I can then mark the hole that is needed on the jaw, drilling it out once again with my 1/4-inch Forstner bit, but you could also use a regular drill bit or a heat tool. I could then put the jaw into place, insert, and attach the Chicago screws to either side. And the great thing about foam is that if you have any spots where the jaw is getting hung up, just trim it away or sand it down. To make the jaw snap shut, I'm going to insert a hook in between parts E and U. A rubber band can then be wrapped around this hook as well as part K. Now, one rubber band was okay, but I'd like it to have a little more resistance. So to beef up the strength of part K so it doesn't deform, I'm going to glue down a small sheet of plastic. The part K template can then be traced onto some PVC board and then glued into place. Now I could attach 2 rubber bands to this piece and up to the hook, and the jaw closes with a lot more force. For my pull string to glide well, I'm going to be using some waxed braided thread. This is cut with some scissors, and then the ends could be cauterized so it doesn't unravel. One end of the string can then be attached to part K. For the string to pull properly, I attach another hook into the wooden dowel. A small nut can then be attached to the other end of the string to act as a weight. Then the string can be looped through the hook. Then, when you pull the string down, it pulls the jaw back and allows the mouth to open and close. Let's continue with the details. I'm going to make the teeth for the upper jaw out of part W. These teeth will be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. I decided to mark the piece about midway through so I can cut out a notch so the teeth will look more embedded into the skull. After I determined the fit was okay, I sanded them with my rotary tool to look more like horse's teeth. Then, starting in the front, I could glue them into place using some Bob Smith super glue. The process for attaching the teeth could then be repeated for the opposite side. The lower teeth consisting of part X were also going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. I was a little more worried about clearance with these lining up with the top teeth, but they actually worked out really well. And like I had mentioned earlier, you could sand the foam down more if necessary. The front teeth for the skull were made up of part Y, which were also traced and cut out of some 10mm foam. These pieces also had a notch cut out of the back, so that they could easily attach to part D. Using some more super glue, I start in the middle and I work my way to the outside. I could then take the outside teeth and glue them a little more back behind. After these have been attached, I could then take some scissors and cut them back. With all my teeth in place and the jaw opening and closing properly, I can now work on some more sanding. I disassembled the skull to make it easier to get to the inside sections, because what I'm going to do is sand down part E to better conform to the interior of the skull. I could also sand and refine the shapes on the lower jaw as well. I know a lot of the sanding looks a little rough, but I'm going to be adding additional foam clay to make it look more like bone in the next video. At this point I decided that I wanted the front of the skull to bend down a little more flat, so I was able to take a well-sharpened knife, cut a wedge out of the foam, and then glue that shut using some super glue and accelerator. Small changes like this just add to the overall profile. Part Z is going to be a small build-up block that'll go right at the front of the lower jaw. This piece will be traced and cut out of some 6mm foam, and once attached it will be sanded flush. Part AA will make up the teeth for the lower jaw. Because I don't want them to interfere with the top jaw closing properly in the front, I'm just going to make these out of some 6mm foam. They could then be cut out and glued to the lower jaw. Now notice that the teeth on the outsides flare out a little bit more. I did put a small bit of 2mm foam behind these to push them out, which will later be covered with foam clay. Then just like the top, I could go through with some scissors and cut the teeth flat. After I was satisfied with how they closed, I then rounded over the bottom of the teeth with my rotary tool. And through this entire process of working with the teeth, it was always just about going back and checking clearances to make sure that the jaw still worked. Part BB will make up little teeth that will go on either side of the lower jaw. These are going to be traced and cut out of some 10mm foam, but heavily refined with my rotary tool. After I was satisfied with the shape that I had sanded, I could then glue these teeth to either side. And with that last step, the base structure for the skull is complete. So you all can see what it takes to put together the base skull for the Mari Lwyd. And be sure to swing back by for part 2, where I'll be finishing this off by adding the foam clay, I'll be doing the painting, and all the additional embellishments that will be going on the back. And if you are building any of my builds or utilizing HD foam, be sure to tag me at SKS Props on Twitter and Instagram because I love seeing your creations. Until next time, build your best with the best. HD foam.